43 miles from the nearest city, 18 miles from the county seat, 7 miles from the closest town with a stoplight. If you're looking for remote, you'll find it in Red Valley, Oklahoma. This is a story about distance, not just physical distance, but the distance between what the world expects and what actually works. The distance between noise and accomplishment. The distance between visibility and value. This is about what happens when nobody's watching. When success doesn't need an audience. When 10 families build something that works precisely because it's far from everything else. In 1956, remote meant something different than it does today. No internet, no cell phones, party line telephones that connected you to neighbors who could hear every conversation. The nearest hospital was 43 miles away. The bank was 18 miles. The school was 7. Remote meant isolated, cut off, on your own. For 10 farming families in Red Valley, remote also meant invisible. The agricultural experts worked in the cities. The government programs focused on larger operations closer to population centers. The success stories happened where people could see them. Out here, 43 miles from anywhere, you succeeded or failed in silence. James Turner's farm sat at the end of a dirt road that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. His nearest neighbor was Thomas Johnson, a mile and a half away. That was close by Red Valley standards. Sarah Merritt's orchard was 3 miles from the Turner place. The Vaughan Ranch spread across land so empty you could stand in the middle and not see another human being. This wasn't isolation by choice. This was Oklahoma geography. This was where the land was cheap enough for families to afford. This was where you went when you couldn't compete in the places where everyone else wanted to be. The drought of 1956 hit remote farms harder than anywhere else. When you're 43 miles from the nearest city, nobody notices when your wheat fails. When you're 18 miles from the bank, foreclosure happens quietly. When you're 7 miles from anything that matters, you disappear without anyone knowing you were there. 10 families faced this truth in silence. They were failing. Separately, quietly, too far from help to ask for it, too remote for anyone to notice. The silence was the worst part. In cities, in towns, even in closer farming communities, people talked. Problems got shared, solutions got found. But out here, with miles between farmhouses, with party lines where neighbors listened to everything, pride kept mouths shut. James Turner walked his failing fields alone. Margaret Turner counted their last $43 without telling anyone. Thomas Johnson watched his pregnant wife worry about feeding their children and couldn't find words to comfort her. Sarah Merritt stood in her dying orchard with no one to tell her it would be okay. Remote meant alone, and alone meant failure was private. What broke the silence wasn't courage. It was the realization that remote didn't have to mean isolated. That distance between farms was just geography, not destiny. That miles could be crossed. Margaret Turner made phone calls. In a place where everyone could hear every conversation, she told the truth loud enough for everyone to listen. "We're failing," she said. And across those miles, across those party lines, other voices answered. So are we. Remote farms, remote families, but suddenly not remote from each other. Within a week, 10 families knew they shared the same crisis. Within 2 weeks, they were meeting in the Turner barn. Within a month, they had made a decision that seemed impossible for people living this far apart. They would pool everything, combine all their land, share all their resources, work together as one operation, not occasionally, not when convenient, always, completely, permanently. The remoteness that had been their weakness would become their strength. Out here, where nobody was watching, they could try something that might fail spectacularly. Out here, where success didn't need witnesses, they could build something unusual. Out here, in the silence, they could be radical. They called it the Red Valley Cooperative. 3,200 acres of remote Oklahoma farmland managed by 10 families who had finally figured out that distance is only isolation if you let it be. The remoteness created freedom. No agricultural experts were going to drive 43 miles to tell them they were doing it wrong. No newspaper reporters were going to cover their experiment. No academic researchers were going to study their model. They could succeed or fail on their own terms, in their own way, in their own silence. And they chose to succeed quietly. The first year was chaos, but quiet chaos. They argued, they disagreed, they figured things out slowly in that barn at the end of that dirt road, with nobody watching, nobody judging, nobody documenting. The mistakes they made stayed in Red Valley. The solutions they found belonged to them. They divided the land not by who owned what historically, but by what worked geographically. The eastern sections for wheat, the western pastures for cattle, the northern elevation for orchards, the southern flats for vegetables, remote pieces of land now unified by purpose. James Turner managed wheat because he understood Oklahoma soil. Robert Vaughan ran cattle because he knew grazing. Sarah Merritt handled orchards because she had 20 years of experience. Each person contributed expertise. Each family covered gaps. Remote from outside help, they became each other's help. The summer of 1956 almost destroyed them. The harvest was terrible. They barely survived, but they survived together, 43 miles from anyone who cared, 18 miles from anyone who noticed, 7 miles from anyone who knew. When the drought broke in 1957, when the rain finally came, the cooperative faced a choice. Should they dissolve and return to individual farms, or stay together? The vote was easy. Remote had stopped being a disadvantage. Remote had become protection. Out here, they could build something sustainable without pressure to grow fast, get big, compete aggressively. Out here, they could take care of each other without explaining themselves to anyone. They stayed together, quietly, remotely, successfully. The children who grew up in this remote cooperative learned different lessons than children in town. They learned that help might be miles away, but it would come. They learned that isolation is geography, not destiny. They learned that the best work happens when you're focused on the work, not on who's watching. Young Robert Turner and Michael Johnson worked those remote fields side by side. Susan Henderson and Linda Merritt managed operations miles from supervisors, learning independence and interdependence simultaneously. The remoteness taught them self-reliance. The cooperation taught them that self-reliance works better when it's shared. In 1963, when James Turner died, the cooperative buried him in that remote cemetery 7 miles from town. No newspaper wrote an obituary beyond the local weekly. No agricultural journal noted the passing of a cooperative founder. He disappeared from the record as quietly as he had lived. But 43 miles from the city, 18 miles from the county seat, 7 miles from the nearest town, 10 families mourned genuinely. And they continued the work, quietly, remotely, successfully. The cooperative created a council system, 7 members, democratic decisions. The remoteness meant meetings happened at night, after work, in that barn, with miles traveled to get there. But they showed up. Because remote doesn't mean disconnected when you've chosen to connect. Through the 1960s and 70s, the agricultural revolution transformed American farming, corporate operations, industrial scale, national markets, all of it happening in places connected to highways, close to cities, visible to the world. 43 miles from the nearest city, the Red Valley Cooperative stayed remote, stayed small, stayed quiet, and stayed alive. The remoteness protected them from trends that destroyed other farms. They didn't have access to easy credit, so they didn't over-lever. They didn't have corporate buyers knocking on their door, so they didn't sell out. They didn't have consultants flying in to tell them to specialize, so they stayed diversified. Remote meant they had to figure things out themselves, and what they figured out worked. The second generation brought new ideas, but the same remoteness. They experimented with organic farming, not because it was trendy, but because the remoteness meant they had always been somewhat organic. Chemical suppliers didn't drive out here regularly anyway. Sustainable practices weren't a philosophy. They were what made sense when you were this far from everything. Jennifer Turner wanted to leave for law school in 1972. She wanted to see what existed beyond these remote roads. The cooperative let her go, supported her education, and welcomed her back. She returned, not in spite of the remoteness, but because of it. Out here, she could practice law quietly, help the cooperative navigate regulations, live a life that cities couldn't offer. The 1980s farm crisis destroyed operations across America. Banks foreclosed, families lost everything, suicides spiked. But 43 miles from the nearest city, the Red Valley Cooperative was too remote to be caught in the credit crisis. They owed almost nothing. They had grown slowly, quietly, sustainably. 3 desperate neighboring farms asked to join during those years. Families who suddenly understood what remoteness could mean. The cooperative accepted some carefully, quietly, expanding to 4,000 acres of remote Oklahoma land, managed by families who had learned that isolation is what you make of it. The 3rd generation grew up with the internet. Suddenly, remote didn't mean cut off. Marcus Turner could research organic markets from the farm. He could connect directly with consumers in Oklahoma City and Tulsa who wanted food from remote farms, from quiet operations, from places doing things differently. In 1995, he proposed organic certification. 3 years of transition, 3 years of quiet transformation, no press releases, no announcements, just work, done remotely, done right. By 1998, the cooperative was certified organic, and the remoteness that had once been a disadvantage became a marketing advantage. Consumers wanted food from remote farms. They wanted quiet operations that weren't industrial. They wanted the story that remoteness told. Profits doubled, then tripled, all while staying 43 miles from the nearest city, all while working in silence, all while being remote. The turn of the millennium brought new members. Young people who specifically wanted remoteness, who wanted to farm far from suburban sprawl, who wanted to build lives in quiet places where work mattered more than visibility. The cooperative grew to 4,500 acres, still remote, still quiet, still successful. In 2005, a corporation offered partnership, money, connections, access to markets they couldn't reach alone. The debate was intense, but in the end, they remembered why they were here. Remoteness was protection. Silence was freedom. Distance was strength. They declined, quietly, remotely, on their own terms. The 2008 financial crisis proved them right. While connected farms, leveraged farms, visible farms crashed, the remote cooperative stayed stable, too far from Wall Street to be affected. Too quiet to be noticed, too remote to be vulnerable. By 2010, they had weathered another storm, quietly, remotely, successfully. Today, the Red Valley Cooperative operates 4,500 acres of certified organic farmland, 43 miles from the nearest city. They support 17 families. They employ 32 workers. They sell directly to consumers who specifically seek out remote farms, quiet operations, food from places that work differently. The children of the cooperative learn that remoteness is geography, not limitation. That quiet work often accomplishes more than loud promises. That distance from the center sometimes means you're closer to what matters. They learn that the best support systems are the ones built slowly, quietly, far from anyone telling you how to build them. That success doesn't need an audience. That value doesn't require visibility. Margaret Turner died in 1989, 43 miles from the city, in a place she never wanted to leave. Someone asked if she ever wished they had been less remote, if she ever wanted to be closer to things that mattered. She looked confused. "We were never far from what mattered," she said. "We were just far from what didn't." That might be the most important lesson of remoteness. That distance is clarifying. That silence lets you hear what's important. That being far from the noise lets you focus on the work. The Red Valley Cooperative will probably always be remote. 43 miles from the nearest city, 18 miles from the county seat, 7 miles from the nearest town. And that remoteness will probably always be exactly why it works. Because remote doesn't mean isolated when you build connections. Quiet doesn't mean weak when you do strong work. Distance doesn't mean disconnected when you choose what to connect to. If you drive out to Red Valley today, you'll spend 43 miles on roads that seem to go nowhere. You'll pass through landscapes that look empty. You'll wonder why anyone would farm this far from everything. And if you're lucky, if you stop, if you ask, you'll discover what 10 families learned 70 years ago in the silence and the distance. That remote is where the real work happens. That quiet is where things actually get built. That the best support doesn't come from being close to everything. It comes from being close to the right things. 43 miles, 18 miles, 7 miles. Numbers that used to mean isolation. Numbers that now mean protection. Numbers that define a place where 10 families became 17. Where decades of quiet work built something that lasts. The remoteness remains, the silence continues, and the work goes on. Because some things work better when nobody's watching. Some things succeed precisely because they're far from the noise. Some support systems thrive in the quiet. 43 miles from the nearest city, that truth gets proven every day, quietly, remotely, perfectly.